So far we've focused mainly on the movie brain cramp here, with Warm Bodies, but today I want to focus a little bit more on the movie World War Z. We're not going to have seen the show today, but I do want to tell you as I get into this today, if you haven't seen the movie World War Z, spoiler alert, okay? You may want to plug your ears if it's something you want to see. Oh, now Jeremy's not going to get anything out of the whole service. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you may want to pause it, go watch the movie, and then come back and listen to the sermon. But what I want to do is I want to share with you this morning a major theme in the movie World War Z, which I think has a lot of parallels to the Christian faith. In the movie World War Z, they wake up one day to a zombie apocalypse, and the UN asks the character of Brad Pitt, who is a UN security advisor, they ask him to go and help the crews to try to figure out a cure or a way to answer or to defeat this zombie apocalypse. Long story short, he goes out, he starts traveling around the country, a lot of things happen, and as he's out there traveling, he notices something when he would see a horde of zombies going after live people. They would always ignore those who were ill. If they had cancer, or if they were crippled, or if they were this, or if they were that, they would tend to ignore them. They wouldn't just tend to, they would ignore them and move around them. So he realizes that the zombies do not like weakness. And he realizes that, and so he comes up with a cure for the zombie apocalypse by looking at weakness. The same thing is true with sin. We can find the cure to sin through, believe it or not, human weakness. You might say, well, that doesn't make sense, but that's what I want to talk to you about this morning. And the first thing we're going to mention this morning is that idea on our passage that we're based on rising, waking dead is awake, O sleeper, rise up from the dead, and Christ will give you life. But anyway, let's look at the first thing we want to talk about this morning, and that is human weakness. Again, in World War Z, the weakness was the answer. Brad Pitt's character realizes that. He notices the avoidance. He actually goes and he finds a disease. He puts a disease in himself, and they ignore him, and he realizes that that's the answer. So after realizing that they will not touch the critically injured, and think about it, they kind of what's the word I'm looking for? They kind of theorize that the reason why that was because, you think about it, if anything wants to survive in this world, what do? We look to the strong, we look to the powerful, we look to the intelligent. And so, if you want to spread a disease, the last thing you want to do is go into someone who's going to die. So the disease of zombies would not attack those who are weak. And so he gives the disease to himself, realizes that, then he gives that disease, a curable disease, but a deadly disease, to everybody else, and they eventually overcome the zombie apocalypse. Everyone ultimately embraces their weakness. And that ends up being the turn in the war that made the difference. You know, the world is very much like zombies. Think about it. We are people who embrace strength. We are people who embrace power. We are people who embrace intelligence. We do not seek out weakness. There's none of us in this world who go about bragging about their weakness. I remember when I was at Judson, and I used to get this question a lot because of people asking, have you ever had God have anyone pray over you to cure you from cerebral palsy? I'm like, no. And I said, I really don't want to, because I realize that my power comes in my weakness. We have this tendency to want to always embrace that which is strong. Think about it. We hide weaknesses. And I like to, You know, I watched myself preaching that first sermon with shorts on, and you can see my crippled up leg all curled up, and I'm like, ugh. So I've worn jeans ever since. You know, even though I embrace my weakness, I still want to hide it. We tend to want to hide our weaknesses. We tend to want to avoid weaknesses. Why? Because the world tells us that weaknesses are something that is to be ashamed of. We don't embrace weakness. We are ashamed of it because we want power, we want beauty, we want strength, we want intelligence. But God chose weakness. As the world clinged to greatness, as the world clinged to power, as the world clinged to strength, God chose weakness. People today still do not understand why God would have chose to bring His Son, the Savior, the King, into the world and have Him die on a cross. It doesn't make sense. But that's exactly what Jesus did. That's exactly what God chose. He chose the message of weakness, the message of the cross, as the message of salvation. 1 Corinthians 1, 18 through 23 says, "The message of the cross is foolish to those who are headed for destruction. But we who are being saved know it is the very power of God. As the Scriptures say, I will destroy the wise and discard the intelligence of the intelligent. He has used our foolish preaching to save those who believe. It is foolish to the Jews who ask for signs from heaven, and it is foolish to the Greeks who seek human wisdom. So when we preach that Christ was crucified, the Jews are offended, and the Gentiles say it's all nonsense." I've seen book after book after book that talks about, well, Jesus can't be the Savior. He died on the cross. Well, that's exactly why He is. Because He embraced weakness to become strong. You know, the message of the cross is a stumbling block. Think about it. When we think of a king or when we think of a leader, we don't think of somebody who is weak. We don't think of somebody who is damaged. We don't think of someone who has been beaten down. We want someone who is strong. Think about it. You know, as we select presidential leaders and stuff, what do we look for? Well, that guy stutters when he speaks, or that guy sweats when he's in front of a camera. He makes me nervous. I don't want him. Why? Because he showed weakness. So we would rather choose a leader based on how he looks, or based on how he speaks, or based on what he does, more than who he is. God sent the message of salvation through the cross so that it would be a weakness, so that it would be a stumbling block to those who embrace strength. It is only through our embracing our weakness that we can come to the answer of Jesus Christ. Even though it doesn't make sense. I mentioned the book Zealot last week, and I'm not trying to encourage it because I think it's wrong, but one of the things that the writer talked about in there, he goes, come on, He really can't be the Savior. What Savior? What King of the Jews is going to die a death with a criminal? See, it's a stumbling block. It's a weakness. But it's a weakness that brings about great power. Not only did God choose the message of weakness, but He also chooses those who are weak. I want to read to you another passage. It says here in 1 Corinthians 26, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, 26 to 28. "Remember, dear brothers and sisters, that few of you were wise in the world's eyes, or powerful or wealthy when God called you. Instead, God chose things the world considers foolish in order to shame those who think they are wise. And He chose things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful." God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all and use them to bring nothing, and use them to bring to nothing what the world considers important. One of the big things in the early church is that it was the people nobody wanted around that were coming to Christ. It was the poor, it was the lame, it was the this, it was the that. It was not the group that you normally went after. It wasn't the high-powered, very wealthy. It wasn't the influential people who were coming to Jesus Christ. It was those who were weak. And if you look at the whole idea of Christianity, if you really look at the whole idea of Christianity, you have to scratch your head and say, how in the world did it get so big? God chose a very weak message of Jesus dying on the cross, something that is foolish and still doesn't even make sense to people today. And then He chose the weak, He chose the despised, He chose those that the world rejected to be His messengers of that gospel. You look at that and you say that's a recipe for failure in the world standard, yet it was Christianity that spread throughout the world, and all of history today, no matter what your textbooks say, all of history today has been affected by Christianity. That's powerful. In our weakness, Christ became strong. You know, again, I'm going back to being asked, I get asked the questions about, do you ever wish you didn't have cerebral palsy? Do you ever wish, you could do this better, you could do that better? Does it bother you when people make fun of you? It never really has. I mean, when someone is being very rude about it, that can bother me, but it never really has. And the reason it hasn't is because I know that in my weakness, in my limited ability, Christ has made me strong. I remember back when I was a young man, 8 or 9 years old, and God first started calling me into ministry. And when He did that, I was a lot like Moses. I was like, I'm not worthy, Lord. And Moses was a stutterer. He didn't think he could ever get up in front of public people and speak in front of people, especially the Pharaoh. And he was a sinner who had murdered, so he had a lot in his life. But God called me, and I did the old, I can remember to this day, as a young man, saying, there's no way I will ever read in public. I was a horrible reader, and I still am, really, if you can tell by the way I read some of these passages. And I was petrified with the idea of reading in public. I was petrified with getting up and speaking in front of people. I was petrified of the limitations I have because of my cerebral palsy. Yet I never wanted to be rid of it because I realized that through Christ, those weaknesses had become my strength. I don't get angry at God because I have CP. I thank God that I have life in Him. And I'm here today to speak to you. See, we need to embrace our weakness. Like I have in my life, we need to realize, hey, yeah, I have physical weaknesses. I have, intelligent weaknesses maybe. I have attribute weaknesses. I don't know what your weaknesses are. You do. And you hide them. When we start to put on a little weight, we wear tighter undershirts like I'm wearing right now, so it kind of sucks it all in, When we start to get older, we grow out the beard so the jowls don't look as bad. So, we have ways of hiding weaknesses. But we don't need to be hiding our weaknesses. We need to be embracing Christ in our weakness. I want to read to you what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12, 8 through 10. It says, and Paul had a weakness. We don't really know for sure what it is. We think it might have been his malaria. But it says, 3 different times I begged the Lord to take it away. Each time he said, I love this, my grace is all you need. My power works best in your weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weakness, so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weakness, and in the insults and hardships and persecutions and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. See, Christ took the whole world's understanding of strength and turned it upside down, and he said, hey, if you want to be strong, then you must be weak. And if you want to be weak, then you try to be strong. We go around in the world each and every day pretending to be strong, pretending to be okay, pretending to live a life certain ways, living a self-righteous life, saying, hey, I'm okay, hey, I have no problems, hey, I'm this, I'm that, I've lived a good life. And we live this life of false intelligence, we live this life of false power, we live this life of false righteousness, and we go day in and day out and say, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. But on the inside we are weak and we are dying in sin. We need to embrace our weakness. We need to realize that we are nothing without Christ. We need to humble ourselves before Him. Paul was weak, but he became strong. I want to read to you another passage that Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 2, 3, and 4, because I've been here before. I've been here before. It says, I came to you in weakness, timid and trembling, and my message and my preaching were very plain. Rather than using clever and persuasive speeches,